Good afternoon, everybody. This is the January 17th, 2023 Fee Committee meeting. The Fee Committee meeting, or the Fee Committee is made up of four members, four voting members, Councilor Tabor and Councilor Denton, and two non-voting members, myself and the city manager. With that, we'll get right into the agenda. If I could have a motion to accept the minutes from March 7th, 2022.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. The second point on the agenda is 2023 outside dining season, City Council referral from January 9th, 2023. And I'll hand it over to the councilors.
Sure. I will motion that we adopt the recommendations from Councilors Bagley and Cook. If you second it, I'll explain my thoughts on a process forward.
Second for discussion purposes.
All right. So the best way I think for us to approach this is if we go item by item, where let's say Councilor Bagley reads item A and maybe Councilor Cook explains item A. We could ask them questions, and then if we want to make amendments to item A, we could obviously motion and try to make amendments. And just if we can't come to an agreement on one of them, we could just move on to the next one and see if we could come to an agreement. And then after we go through all of them initially, we could go back through to the ones we didn't come to an initial agreement on, see if we could hash something out, and go from there.
Okay, and just to clarify our scope, we're not going to discuss traffic flow or design criteria unless they're tangential. But as I understand it, our purpose is to discuss the permit fee cost, either for sidewalk encumbrance or parking spaces.
I viewed it as all-encompassing because we'll be doing fees for whatever parking or traffic areas are decided upon for outdoor dining. So it'd be tough to do one and not the other.
Okay, well, let's roll on and see where it takes us.
All right, so would either of you like to read item A?
I'll go first. And then I guess I would also say I think my interpretation from the last meeting was that the council would like us to have a fairly robust proposal for them to then evaluate and make amendments to. So I think the more we accomplish here, the more time it's out in the public so that the public can see what we might vote on, and then we can vote on it at the council level. So I don't know how you guys want to do it, but I guess that would be my interpretation. So item A is outdoor dining will commence for parking loading zone encumbered dining starting on May 1st and ending on Indigenous Peoples Day. The City of Portsmouth will do everything possible to place and remove the barriers within 10 working days following the beginning and end of the parking loading zone dining season. Sidewalk dining will be allowed as the weather permits, but sidewalk encumbrance should be removed so as not to interfere with sidewalk snow removal, with penalty of fine should removal not take place prior to a snowstorm. Yearly permitting for sidewalk dining will take place in March. Applications for all outdoor dining will be accepted starting February 15th with a deadline of April 1st.
I think that's self-explanatory, but Councilor Cook, do you want to add anything to that? Or
one of the things that this does change is that we would need to set up a fine for sidewalk encumbrance in a snowstorm, so that we need to know what that fine was for sidewalk encumbrance, because essentially what it does is it leaves the decision up to to restaurants, restaurateurs on sidewalk dining, how long they're willing to leave their chairs out, but the requirement is that they can't be out and the encumbrance cannot be there if there's a snowstorm, and we're going to require snow removal on the part of the city. So therefore, they would be subject to a fine if they're encumbering the sidewalk when we need to clear the sidewalk.
If I may, I want to clarify, and we have the benefit of Parking Director Ben Fletcher on Zoom, so between Ben and Andrew and myself and Peter Britz, I don't believe it's the purview of the Fee Committee to talk about fines. That would be an ordinance item, I think, but I'm not sure. So maybe for the purpose of discussion of just we can do some homework on the fine bit, but I don't believe fines are the purview of this group.
It would seem we have a precedent. We have a policy, an ordinance that sets the cost of a sidewalk encumbrance for construction.
Yep.
And I think it's 50 cents a square foot, but it's charged monthly. That would seem to be, if you had that as a fine, you could say it's consistent with what we charge.
So you recommending that we do that, but just on a smaller scale, where if it's out there during a snowstorm, for the days it's out there during the snowstorm, it's that percentage of the monthly fine?
It's,
Well, maybe with penalty of fine as dictated by ordinance.
Yeah.
Do we want to take it off the plate of this?
right. Yeah, I was thinking that we've already got an ordinance for when, somebody puts a crane blocking the street, or somebody puts a scaffolding on the sidewalk, so
Okay.
why reinvent the wheel?
And just a thought on the process. If there's going to be public comment, I'm fine making adjustments as we go, then letting the public speak, and then us voting for the final one to make sure the public knows what we're discussing and what we're going to send forward, and you hear our rationale first behind things. So, does that make sense?
Counselor,
Yeah.
if I may, you weren't in the room when we mentioned that we have to wrap the Zoom up by 5:20, so as long as we have time management on our side, we're good. Okay.
You want to take this one?
So, and so I'm good with A, tentatively.
Yes, I don't think, I think there's consensus here, and I would even say at the council level about the dates. They seem to be positively received on all fronts. And,
So,
Right.
B.
B, outdoor dining shall not encumber street flow of traffic in the high-traffic zones of the downtown area. Exceptions shall only be permitted by appeal to the city manager with evidence of traffic flow below 1,000 cars per day.
And I guess we don't have legal here, so I guess we'll talk about it. And me personally, as a resident, I would like to see all the outdoor dining continue. However, in talks and feedback, the places that seem to garner the most people saying that they didn't like it were the high traffic lane areas, namely Pleasant Street, Fleet Street, and the end of Congress Street. So our thought process is, as those places, I think all had about 2,500 cars per day, if my calculations, or if my memory serves me right, we basically would not allow outdoor dining for, I believe it's 4 locations. And that would be due to the city's request, and by the city, I mean the city staff, that they feel that there's too much conflict with vehicle traffic.
I'll speak for myself. I agree with this part of the motion. If you don't have some delimiter based on traffic, we get into picking and choosing restaurants. And I don't see it being a good thing to do, to have the council picking and choosing restaurants. I do sense from the public some consistent pushback about losing some of the traveling lanes, particularly streets that are made one way only. So I'm okay with that.
And I'm actually not in favor of how this is written. My preference would be to allow outdoor dining continue where it existed this past year. So I don't think we're in agreement on this. So the thought would be to move on to the next one and come back.
Okay.
I guess I'll read this one.
See.
C, outdoor dining in parking loading zones shall follow a uniform appearance with city-placed concrete barriers and plant box as described in the December 22 city report, and wooden platforms to allow for uniform accessibility. Restaurants with existing platforms and surrounds designed for prior seasons shall be grandfathered in with permission of the city manager. All outdoor dining places shall have tables and separate chairs to allow for uniform accessibility. When requiring a divider from sidewalk flow, sidewalk dining shall require either a metal or metal-looking barrier or a rope-like barrier for separation. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yes. The goal of this provision was to create more uniformity in outdoor dining. there have been several complaints about the looks of various locations. And so the goal was not only to improve the aesthetic of the downtown, but also to create a space that is accessible to everyone, where outdoor dining is accessible to anyone in the city at any restaurant location that has outdoor dining. Currently, that accessibility is somewhat limited in a few locations, and we wanted to make sure that anyone and everyone could sit outside. It's very difficult for some people to sit in certain types of table settings. It's very difficult for them to access outdoor dining that is below the curb if the ramp is not adequate to kind of access that space. And it can also be difficult to maneuver. So by asking for a platform space that accommodates everyone. And we wanted to leave in this permission, this grandfather permission on the part of the city manager and the city staff, because there are some sites that don't necessarily follow this exact description, but have been identified as very desirable spaces. And we want to make sure that we're not asking too much of our restaurants who've already put restaurateurs who've put quite a bit of money and investment into outdoor dining. So there are spaces that are already platformed, but they aren't necessarily using the standard concrete barriers and planter boxes. So we're allowing some leeway there while restaurants either develop that or we develop new visions around outdoor dining. And we're asking those who have not invested very much at all in their outdoor dining space, besides having the city put down concrete barriers, to invest a little bit more, make sure you have a platform so your space is accessible, and some planter boxes to make the space more attractive to everyone downtown.
So, I guess a thought and then a question for city staff. I wholeheartedly agree when it comes to accessibility. I don't necessarily have an opinion on what it looks like personally. I believe at the last city council meeting, a question may have been asked of city staff regarding if we're allowed to grandfather some in and not others. Is this ringing a bell with anyone, or am I misremembering?
I think that might have been a public comment.
That was a public comment.
I guess I'll speak, if you want, to our thought process. So the platforms in most cases make sense for accessibility. However, if it was a very low curb or there was no curb at all, putting a platform in would be counterproductive. So that's why we want to make sure the city manager has that ability to say, you don't need a platform here because it doesn't make sense. But in most places it makes sense because then you can be flush with the curb. The picnic table, and it also we think makes it look better. The picnic table versus separate chairs is kind of the same thing. We think that a patio type setup looks better. However, for people that, let's say, are a bit infirm or elderly, getting in and out of a picnic table can be a challenge, whereas a separate chair, especially if that separate chair has arms, is much easier to sit in and get in and out of. So we thought these two components do two things. One, they make it more accessible, and two, they generally should improve the look and feel. However, I think the grandfather discussion came up, and I'll name a place in particular is the press room. They have some built-in bench seating, which I think is desirable because you have the separate chair and you have the built-in bench seating. And the general feedback we've gotten from the public is that one looks particularly nice, but maybe doesn't quite meet the spirit of what we're saying here. So we want to make sure the city manager has the discretion to say this is good. Does that make sense?
That does. Do you have any?
Yes, I'm with you on accessibility. I also think the restaurant owners themselves prefer tables. It's gives them more flexibility, and there's actually industry best practice around that. A question for Peter Britz as planning director. How would staff interpret follow a uniform appearance?
I would think we'd have to have some kind of guidelines on that, just to say uniform appearance. If there was a style that was views that we could follow as the guideline, that would work, but a lot of interpretation just to say uniform appearance, I think. It'd be hard to regulate that. What do you have, I mean, I guess, I don't know what that could mean.
Yeah, I think we've been successful with the hybrid of first-year outdoor dining concrete barriers topped with wooden planters. But, is that the standard we want from everybody? I'm not sure. I think there's all kinds of good parklet designs if you go into the world of parklets.
Yeah.
And so I'm concerned about how if we as policymakers say this should follow a uniform appearance, the devil's in the implementation of that.
I have a quick thought, and maybe we could call it a minimum uniform standard, and then if somebody wanted to do something that was above and beyond the standard, they could go to the city and say, we want to use this parklet design that costs $20,000 instead of 10. Would this qualify? Is that something the city could handle, or is that just as
The first part,
difficult?
where there's a uniform design, would be easy enough. The second part, I guess, it's going to leave it up to discretion of staff, and that's going to be where the devil's in the details again,
Right.
How do we want to be fair to everybody that they follow the policy, so if we can come up with a uniform standard, then that, to me,
And
it should be something everybody can comply with.
if I may weigh in, Beverly was careful to point out in collaboration with our traffic engineers that the height of the barriers and any obstruction beyond that were primarily so as not to impede the view shed of a driver or a
Right.
pedestrian or
3
things
to
like
5
that. So
feet, yeah.
so in case people are wondering where the genesis of height of a barrier or things related to folks' barriers, that's where that came from.
I should note also that we define what the uniform appearance is clearly here in Section C, where we say with city-placed concrete barriers and planter boxes as described in the December 22nd city report. So we're clear as to what we're talking about when we talk about a uniform appearance. And then what we do is we grandfather in those that have already invested money in something that looks different by allowing them to appeal to have that grandfathered in. So the goal is not to have restaurants designing new platforms or changing the look. It's you should follow this uniform appearance if you haven't done this already. This is what we're expecting of you if you didn't apply last year. But if you've already invested a lot of money, we don't want to say, I'm sorry that you invested all this money last year. You can't use that this year. We're going to ask you to do something entirely different. We want those restaurants to have the opportunity to appeal. So I think that's really the goal here, is to create a fairly uniform standard appearance. Plus, it makes it easier when it comes to traffic and traffic monitoring if we know everyone's at a certain sideline for the city.
Planning Director Ritz, it's the first time I've said that. Would that be enough of a guideline to work from?
Yeah, what it says here, so they follow a uniform appearance. Here it says, with city-placed concrete barriers and planter boxes as described in the December 22nd report. In her recommendation, Beverly said that they'd be limited to 3 feet in height, which I think would be a good addition to that probably. And include jersey barriers and those that might be constructed on sidewalks. So I think this recommendation has a little bit more to it, but yeah, I think again, as long as there's a structure there that we can follow.
Okay.
And it doesn't take a lot of interpretation.
And
The grandfathering, I don't know. I guess the grandfathering might have to still meet the height requirement, I would think, at least. That's where it gets a little sticky.
but I think the height is sensible for safety.
That's why it's why
It's a best practice, yeah. By the way, I think it was a December 14 city council meeting, not December 22, so we may want to.
Oh, 2022, I think. It
That
was,
was at least meant to be
Oh,
2020.
2022.
Yep.
December 22.
Okay.
I guess guess we have two options here with this. One is to come back to it either later today or as a council, or if we wanted to parse it down to just be on the wooden platforms to allow uniform accessibility, and then essentially not have a standard when it comes to which of the three the former planning director recommended. What are your thoughts on that? I see you're smiling at me, Kate. So.
When I received complaints around outdoor dining, it was usually about the appearance of outdoor dining. That a space would look junky, that looked very different than others, that you couldn't see in from the street, that it blocked sight lines in downtown. I think that we have to be careful about just allowing anything and everything downtown. I think we need to kind of continue to create that atmosphere where everyone feels welcome, where people feel like they have good sightlines. Not just driving sightlines, but when you're walking down the sidewalk, you want to be able to see across the sidewalk. You want people to see all the businesses around them when they're walking down the sidewalk. You don't want that encumbered by a built-in environment from outdoor dining. So I think that's what I would be really cautious in just allowing anything, because there is a concern about maintaining the look of downtown and making sure that people feel welcome and comfortable anywhere.
Well, I'm hearing from the planning director that there's a certain level of comfort that we can refer to standards that were written by the previous planning director. And I also think that the platforms are a big, I was going to say big step up, but that's a bad pun. I think they improve the parklet appearance, and they do make it accessible. So, having asked these questions, I'm more comfortable with the language that we've got as is. I think we would want to say, described in the December city report, minimum 3 feet, a maximum 5 feet in height, and wooden platforms.
And I would be more than comfortable with that as long as it's understood that those who already did something higher past years, press from whoever else could keep theirs. That's,
And I think we've got that.
okay, just want to make sure we're all
Yeah.
in agreement on that.
So if I may, there would be the addition of a mention of a height limitation of 3 feet,
3 to 5.
plus the additional 1 foot for planters. I think 5 would be above what Eric Eby would be comfortable recommending.
Okay.
Just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
D.
No, this is the meat and potatoes. Parking loading zone outdoor dining shall have a permit fee of $1,500 a space or $5 a square foot, whichever is a lesser expense. Any restaurant taking up a parking space must pay for the full square footage of the parking space or the standard space fee. Sidewalk encumbrances shall have a flat fee of $500 a season, with sidewalk encumbrance space limitations determined by the city manager.
Counselor, I would propose we amend this to $2,000 per space and the appropriate square footage equivalent.
I'm actually in agreement with the proposal, but there's one amendment which I would like to make, which is more housekeeping versus costs, and that would be adding a sentence which would read, outdoor dining that is not in a parking/loading zone or on a sidewalk will have a permit fee of $5 a square foot. And the rationale for that is we're just covering, with the current language, most of the outdoor dining from last year, but it's not covering, said, outdoor dining on Hill Street. If we were to allow that to happen. And by adding that language, it would allow outdoor dining at the Hill Street establishment. And the $5, I just kept $5 because the fees which you had listed were the fees from last year. So not that you necessarily be agreeing with the $5 a square foot, but would you agree with that amendment? So this would allow Hill Street or any other establishment in a similar position to be able to continue outdoor dining?
I think,
That's right.
isn't that, Counselor Bagley amended to say $5 per square foot, or 1,500 space, whichever is lesser,
But that's for
parking, loading, got it.
parking and loading zones, but
Yeah.
the Hill Street establishment doesn't fall in a parking or loading zone.
Perhaps the amendment could be in any space that is not a sidewalk. That would include
Right, because I
most.
think it's important to remember here that we do have a sidewalk cafe policy, which was passed in 2012 and is $10 a square foot. And we have 6 restaurants that are actively using it. So I think we ought to, let's not create whole new fees where we've already got fees.
If staff could remind everyone here that the price per square foot on sidewalks this year was $10 a square foot, that you are correct, Counselor. That is the sidewalk policy as well, sidewalk cafe encumbrance, which is, before COVID, a different permit altogether. And the recommendation of staff was that to phase in the amount of charge per parking space, it was $1,500 this current year. The recommendation of staff was to bring it to the $3,000 per parking space at the appropriate time. If you think there is one, Ben can speak to the rationale for that, but I just want to put out there that staff would advocate for that $3,000.
But does staff have any thoughts on outdoor dining, which is neither in a parking/loading zone or sidewalk? Because that's currently not covered anywhere in the
Right.
proposal
So,
in front of us.
given that we would not support dining in a travel lane, we wouldn't have language for that, but
However,
if
that's
it were
less
to
than
apply to Hill Street,
yeah.
that would be the $10 per square foot, using the sidewalk number.
I believe they paid $5 a square foot last
Right,
year.
they're paying 5 historically in line with the 1,500.
I think we need to check that, because
Yeah,
It was,
this report says it was $10.
Yeah, that was an oversight by
Sidewalk
Director
fees.
Mesa Zent.
It was only $5?
Yeah, it was originally set at 10,
And we
reduced in half for
charged
5.
Okay, yeah.
And then when it came through in the December packet, that was just an oversight, because I remember we asked about that.
right.
And Hill Street, didn't we find out that that's less than 1,000 cars?
We did.
Correct.
Right.
I think it was about 40.
It was, I had it here. It was 50 on the weekday. We did not have a Saturday count for Hill at Tanner.
Councilor Cook?
I wanted just to highlight that the reason we included a fee here for sidewalk encumbrance is for this year to start shifting away from a policy of $10 per square foot necessarily for sidewalk encumbrance, because the main cost to the city, from what I've gleaned, from sidewalk encumbrance is health inspection of the space, making sure the setup is appropriate, and then just monitoring and making sure that no one goes beyond the space that was originally agreed to at the city level. The city already has the ability to say you can't encumber more sidewalk than a certain space and certain amount, just because it impedes sidewalk pedestrian traffic flow. So since it's really kind of a standard kind of monitoring, no matter what the size of the outdoor dining space is for sidewalks, the goal was to move to just a flat fee for every location. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage outdoor dining. sidewalk dining because we believe it creates vibrancy downtown. And so by giving restaurants a flat fee and allowing the city to determine the limitations on how far their outdoor dining can encumber the sidewalk, because you don't want to reduce pedestrian flow too much, then we're encouraging restaurants to continue their outdoor dining on sidewalk spaces, which we believe builds that vibrancy in the downtown area. Right, as it is, you may have a restaurant with a significant amount of sidewalk space in front of their restaurant that could be used for outdoor dining, yet they don't want to pay the fees, the per table, per chair fees for that type of outdoor dining, because it can be very expensive if you have a larger space. So I think we want to be careful, too, that we're not discriminating against restaurateurs who don't have as much money as others.
Could we hear from staff on, I think that $10 a square foot was passed in 2012 by an 8-to-1 vote and has been in practice for going on 11 years. So I understand you would like to essentially lower that and make it more flexible, but I'd like to hear from staff.
Well, I'll start it off, but Peter, please weigh in. I hear Beverly's voice in my head saying that if businesses rely on real estate that's not theirs as part of their business plan, that's not appropriate, and that the city's right-of-way, if you will, should not always be assumed to be something that could be factored into the business plan. So this conversation inherently creates winners and losers. There are folks that have real estate that is conducive to outdoor dining more so than others. And I think Beverly's point, and when we were talking about the staff level, was if you're really that reliant on space that isn't yours, maybe you need to think about a location that makes more sense, that helps you achieve the maximum number of seats, indoor, out, what have you. And to have the inequity be apparent, some folks have more real estate, have more sidewalk, have more by virtue of where they're located. It does remind us that I don't think we can achieve equity, but at a financial cost.
Right, to which I would add, we have an ordinance in place that has been successful for a decade.
And we haven't raised the fees.
And doesn't seem to be causing any hardship that I'm
Right.
hearing about.
And so, just to go back to my initial statement, since I still support the fees as written down, and since you don't support the fees as written down, I don't think we're going to come to an agreement on those fees here. But I would still like to add that sentence, regardless if you agree with it being the $5 from last year, increasing it, so that way outdoor dining can continue on Hill Street per the recommendation.
That for areas not in a parking space or a loading zone or a sidewalk
Correct.
that are deemed permittable for outdoor dining would also be charged the $5 a square foot.
Correct.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. So,
And as long as there's no unintended consequences.
and Councilor Bagley?
I just want to make a comment because I think that, we had a policy in place for a number of years, and I believe it was capped at 10 establishments, which we never came close to. And the feedback I've received from citizens is they like the vibrancy of outdoor dining. So the reason we created outdoor dining was to try and save the restaurants during COVID. Speaking personally, the reason I think we should continue it has nothing to do with the P&L statements of restaurants. I think we should continue it because the overwhelming response we've had from citizens is they'd like to see more of it. So to that end, I think we should maybe not look back at a policy that seemed to discourage outdoor dining because there wasn't very much of it and say that that was achieving what residents wanted. However, I do understand the argument that if you have a bigger space, you should probably pay more than if you have a smaller space. So I would just leave that on the table. It sounds like we're going to have to discuss this at the council level anyway. But I did want to make that distinction because I think it's very important. We're doing this because people seem to want the vitality of outdoor dining. It has nothing to do with whether or not it makes a restaurant more or less profitable, from my perspective.
And I could speak to the outdoor dining prior to COVID. I was on the council during that time period, and I'd asked the same manager, why is there a cap at 10 restaurants or 12, whatever it may have been? And his response was, and the reason why I was asking is I want to eliminate the cap. And he said, well, we haven't met the cap yet. We haven't even come close to it because there weren't enough restaurants applying for outdoor dining at the time to come close to the cap. That's why we never touched it. So, well, with that said, and since we're not in agreement, should we move on to E? Councilor Cook?
Can I just share one more thing about the reason why we chose the $1,500 rate? For several restaurants downtown, the cost of building a platform is going to be significant. We received feedback from one restaurateur via email that the cost for building a platform was close to $6,000. So when we're talking about the fee, it's the fee plus improvements. And so it's already going to be significantly more for several of them than it was last year.
So I would propose, we hold at 1,500 this year and move to 2,000 next year and put language in for that. Councilor Cook makes a point. This is an interesting study from National Association of City Traffic Officers, NACTO, about parklets. And it's old now, but even then, a full-blown designed parklet with plantings was in the order of $15,000 for one parking space. So 2 parking spaces, $30,000. So I've gone back and forth on this in my own mind, and I do think, as the mayor said, restaurants should have skin in the game to, if they're going to use the public domain for their business, the fee needs to be set so that they don't gobble up space that they don't need. But on the other hand, if we're implementing design criteria, as we are, I think it's going to take a year for restaurants to invest, to make the investment, the $6,000, $10,000, $15,000 investment to get up to what we all want, which is outdoor dining that looks really good as well as is fun to enjoy.
Councilor Bagley?
I appreciate Councilor Tabor's thought process there, and I do have some data that we didn't discuss that may help. Councilor Cook and I greatly shortened the season, so I believe Director Fletcher can confirm, but we estimated the revenue per space during the outdoor season last year would be $5,700 using some complicated formula. And this year, we estimate the revenue per space would be $3,517. So that there's a significant drop on the amount of revenue the city might lose. It brings the on-street parking back in the cooler months, which kind of counterintuitively, it's more important to have on-street parking in the cold months because people are less likely to walk than it is in the summer months when there are more people, because people are more willing to walk. And to that point, and perhaps Director Fletcher could say this, as a city, I think what we're concerned is bottom line number, how much revenue does parking generate? And I think last year, even with outdoor dining, we generated more parking meter revenue in the city. So it's hard to parse down to the single parking space. It may be better to look at the whole economy of the parking environment. And if you have a desirable economy where people are parking in the garage, we've got fantastic utilization of the Foundry now. We're not necessarily losing that $3,517 because we may be recouping it when people choose to park in other locations.
Yeah, I think we're all aligned that we're not trying to replace the parking revenue of the 67 spaces. There's a higher purpose here. There's a greater public benefit, and I think we're taking a step, as both of you have said, towards a downtown that's more pedestrian-oriented than car-oriented. And I think that's the long-term direction we want to go. So this is a fine point, is it 1,500, is it 2,000? We're not trying to wring all the nickels of the parking meters out of these 67 spaces. I would also, well, we can ask Ben, but, if the Foundry is now up past 70% occupancy, I have to think that outdoor dining was part of that.
If I can jump in and ask Ben to jump in, Ben is sharing some information with me that the $3,500 calculation would be if you had outdoor dining in operation May 15th to Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples' Day. If you switched it back to May 1st, it would be almost $3,900 per parking space. And Ben would also tell you, we do recoup much of the revenue, but there are no price escalators after the third hour in either garage. And Hanover is closing at least a third of the spaces very regularly. So we're primarily recouping at the $1 per hour rate, and at Hanover it's $2. But Ben, did I do that any justice? Do you want to add anything in?
That's exactly what you need across, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're all in agreement with the end goal of having a more walkable Portsmouth. We're not agreed on the specific numbers, and given we only have about 30 minutes left and there's members of the public here, I think we should move on to the next item.
Well, I just wanted to say that I would be okay with the current language, 1,500, if we said we escalated to 2,000 next year after everybody invested in their platforms. So if that's agreeable to you.
Do you have any additional thoughts on that, Councilors Cook or Bagley?
I would say perhaps we could float for the council meeting an option A and an option B.
Okay. I think that's,
And if I may, in terms of process, this would live as a policy versus an ordinance. Policies are easier to change. So if that plays into anyone's thinking about what we're thinking this year for '24 versus next year for '24, it would be possible to amend the policy in one vote versus 3 readings and all that
Right.
stuff.
that's fair.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, item E. Either you want to take a,
Restaurants requesting a parking loading zone encumbrance or street encumbrance can receive up to a $500 reduction in fees if they compost food waste. For sidewalk spaces, restaurants may receive up to a $200 reduction in fees if they compost food waste.
And I guess I'll speak to that briefly. Councilor Denon congratulated Planning Director and Sustainability Director, Peter Britz, but he left off the sustainability part, which I thought was a bit humorous because he's obviously a big champion of sustainability, as I think most of us on the council are. But I think Councilor Cook and Councilor Denon are always looking to make Portsmouth a leader in sustainability. And because we are a Dillon's Rule state, not a home rule state, it's difficult to find avenues to encourage people to choose a sustainability option. Personally, I don't have strong opinions either way on this particular item, and I'll leave it at that.
No, I support this.
and I'm actually going to recommend an amendment to this, which would be a $500 reduction in fees per parking space and up to $2 reduction in fees per square foot. Because that math should align. And the reason for that is, by ordinance, Portsmouth requires all restaurants with outdoor dining on city property, whether it be in the street, on the sidewalk, to compost. Those that do not compost are in violation of an ordinance which was passed back in 2019. And I think this would help encourage more restaurants to compost by giving the reduction in fees to anyone who actually opts, because it's an incredibly expensive endeavor. And
I'd support the idea of it, obviously, but I'm a little worried about the enforcement. Like, what are we going to use as an enforcement mechanism?
We did this past year. It was $200, and I believe the way it was done is the health officer checked with them, and it was twice to see if they were successfully composting with any of the compost providers. So that's how it was done last year. This past year was $200, I believe, in the beginning of the season and $200 halfway through.
Right.
And I think the same thing could be done.
Okay.
Councilor Cook?
I should note that there's also nothing that's prohibiting the city, if the city finds that a restaurant wasn't composting, in the way that they said to charge a retroactive fee for, or increased fee for the part of the summer which
Or
they were
just
not
the fee.
composting. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I also would say I don't have a problem with that change as well. I think the goal here was simply to say those who are encumbering the street loading zones, they're paying more money automatically by just the way that the fees are set up, was to give them an equivalent break. So I think it's reasonable.
Councilor, any thoughts on my proposed amendment to it?
It's consistent if we move the parking space fee up next year. We'd want to continue to be a 20% discount, which would be, so I just want us to be able to, right now it's a 33% discount, sorry.
Correct.
Liberal arts major. And so if we move to 2,000 next year, we'd want to stay consistent at 33%.
I agree on that.
If I might make a suggestion, perhaps we just call it a 33% discount.
That's,
And then whenever the fees are moving, the discount automatically aligns.
that makes sense. And that is why you're an engineer and I'm not. 33%?
Yeah.
And would that work for staff?
It's clear.
And then, how about F?
The city manager has the authority to act with notification of the council if any unforeseen circumstances occur or unexpected adjustments are needed. Do you want to speak to this one?
Our concern was, say we have a hurricane warning, and we need to be really careful about that with outdoor dining and tables sitting outside in downtown. We want the city manager to be able to make adjustments as needed and to warn everyone that they are required to get their tables off the sidewalk if we anticipate, say, rough weather or some other unforeseen circumstance. So I think that's really what the goal is here. It's not to make wholesale changes. It's to anticipate any unforeseen circumstance with outdoor dining.
Have we had any legal review of this language?
We have not. But if I can chime in, when we first had outdoor dining, it was, 2020 was an awkward year, but in 2021, there was a specific mention by the prior council to grant the city manager certain authority to act administratively when it made sense. So I think this merely codifies that thought. Obviously, whether it's me or some city manager in the future, the idea wouldn't be to act in a way that is counter to what the council approved for policy, and we'd notify the council. I think
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any additional thoughts before we open up to public comment? So we could comment after the public as well.
Yes, well, let's just clarify. So at this point, we are not in agreement on, we're in agreement on $1,500 a space for this year. My proposal to raise it to $2,000 next year, not have a second, Josh, or?
Not at this time.
Okay, but I would still
That's fair.
give it to the council.
And with that, how many people on Zoom are there wanting to speak, if any?
We don't have any folks on Zoom who wish to speak.
All right. In that case, I'd like to open it up to the public. Looks like we have about 20 minutes, so if any member of the public would like to come up and take a seat, please state your name. If you're a member of the Portsmouth community, i.e. a resident. And I'm going to ask you to, if you could try to keep it to around 3 minutes.
I will.
Thank you.
Short and sweet. Page Trace, 27 Hancock Street. Counselor Denton, it's lovely to give restaurants the benefit of a break in fees if they compost, but could you not consider in the future or the near future also adding other restaurants in the city? Somehow consider giving them a break in their sewage bill or their waste bill, because if they are composting, then there's less sewage, to my mind. You have less fats, oil, and grease. Euphemism, fog. And the sewer system that we currently have on Pierce Island is exceedingly sensitive would be a good word, to fats, oil, and grease. So I applaud what you're doing with restaurants having outside dining, but there are plenty of restaurants throughout the entire city, so that gives them an ability to participate. So I might think of sending out something with a sewer bill or something, water bill, saying, hey, if you compost, let us know. Or if you change to composting, there might be a reduction or there might be something. And my next question is, all of this is great. I remember when the city manager was thinking that an average parking space might be $5,800 in revenue.
That was a number when we were considering 210
Yeah,
days.
yeah. I applaud everyone for all the work on the outside dining, but I have to ask if there isn't something that can be done. If you are providing outside dining for restaurants, then is there something that can be done at the same time for merchants to give them benefit that they don't currently have? That's only, I mean, we as taxpayers are paying for it, but it seems a little lopsided, and we have more than just restaurants in this town. So if you could consider that, that would be great, as the fees committee. There must be something that you can do to help these poor merchants, because they deserve the same consideration as a restaurant. And other than that, I really wish, with all due respect to every restaurant out there that has outside dining, I'm mindful of the bottom line, and Councilor Tabor was right. There's a greater good here, but I wish, I'll get criticized for this, and I know it, but I wish the fees were higher so that there was, not totally higher. I mean, Councilor Tabor, you're correct. $2,000 next year, $3,000. There's got to be something. We're not in the same emergency that the governor called 2 years ago. And that, I thank you.
Thank you, Paige.
And thank you, Josh, for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Hi, Liza Hewitt, Portsmouth resident. I have a question for you, city councilors. Will there be a public hearing on this? Because it seems to me that what I'm hearing is that it's all going to be decided through the council. The public can speak up during public comment. But is there going to be a public hearing? Because I'm hearing, Mr. Bagley saying that everybody he's talked to is in favor of this. And it's kind of funny. I guess it depends upon who you talk to, because I've heard of a lot of people that aren't too thrilled with it for various reasons, both people in the city that live in the city and people that used to come in from outside of the city that no longer do. And so I feel like this is, you kind of have talked to the restaurant people, and you've apparently talked to or heard from the businesses downtown. And I heard at the last council that you would talk to the people living downtown, but there are about 20,000 other people in this city that I'm not sure anybody's heard from. So I really think there needs to be a public hearing on this. This is a big deal, and we were told that this, we were kind of told 2 years ago this was a COVID thing, and now we're being told this is a permanent forever thing, and it does change whether your opinion is that it's more vibrant or whatever. It does change the character of downtown, and I think that 20,000 people, whether they show up or not, should have the opportunity to speak at a public hearing versus, taking it piecemeal and not, the only option is public comment. That's one thing. $1,500 for 5 months to me equates to about $10 a day for 162 square foot of rented space from the city. I may have my numbers wrong, but I tried to look at it. I'm not a mathematician. So you kind of need to sell one meal to recoup your money. And then the rest is gravy to the restaurants, which is fine, but we're not giving that gravy to downtown businesses. And I have a problem with that. I think, we're not giving them the opportunity for significantly reduced rental space on the city. And so we're really targeting one population, and I'm not sure that that's fair. I find it fascinating, and Karen, you'll be thrilled to hear I agree with you on this, that, if we've got restaurants that have set up their business model with outdoor dining, I think there's a problem with that. The city staff has recommended $3,000. And, so some council members, you, Mr. Bagley, very quick to point out previous council members who did not listen to city staff recommendations and how wrong that is. And then here you are not listening to city staff recommendations. So I just wanted to throw that out. You told the residents last year that these fees were only for last summer to recoup from COVID, and now you're suggesting that they stay the same. So, I'm just throwing this out there. The composting, I just wonder how many of these restaurants that are composting for a fee reduction are already composting. And I don't know how much Mr. Fox charges, so I don't know whether they're recouping all their money or making money or whatever it is, because you haven't really discussed that. Finally, I think you are picking and choosing restaurants. What I'm hearing is that there's going to be no dining in the street per se, and I don't disagree with that. I think that the situation up there at the corner of Congress and Middle was extremely dangerous, and I can't tell you the number of times that I approached that street and had people jumping out behind the trees that Jumpin' Jays had planted in their barricades. You couldn't see people. You couldn't see them at night. They couldn't see that I was sitting there in my car waiting to drive. So I don't disagree with that. But now what you've done is you've spot zoned for some people to have street dining and not others. And I wonder whether that's going to come back to haunt you, because I don't know how you can do that. I don't know how you can say some people can have it and some people can't, because we've arbitrarily decided that if you have less than 1,000 cars, you can use the street, especially when you've named one restaurant that this is going to affect, has 2 parking spots out in front of their restaurant. So why are they not using those and not closing a street? Just a question, just asking that question. And when you are closing a street, how is that being calculated? Like, you said $5. Well, you know, you could say that space on Hill Street is probably about 8 parking spots. And so if you look at that, 8 parking spots times $1,500 is $12,000. Is that person paying $12,000? Like, what are they paying? To say $5 on a street doesn't really tell me a whole lot. So I'd just be curious to know about that. And I guess I'll leave it at that. But I do hope that there's I do hope there's some type of public hearing. Maybe nobody will come out. Maybe they will. But I think that in fairness to the taxpayers that really are taking the burden of this, there should be some type of public forum to talk about how this is going to go forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Any other speakers?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. I think I'm going to go down the line here as you discussed your non-fee discussion. I would ask you to think about the first thing about the barrier designs and uniformity and basically dictating that. In listening to the discussion, you're saying the new ones have to have the same kind of barriers, but you're going to grandfather in the old sites. I guess I would remind you, and maybe the city manager remembers this, that at the time when we started this, all of the barriers that were consistently painted and all of the flower boxes and everything were gone. So I guess I would ask you to think about how you would get uniformity again without whoever would be new to the project paying for all this and where they would get it, because I don't know what the status is of the barriers that were used, if they're coming back or going out, but that would probably be a consideration for you to think about. Again, I would ask you to think about more than just the restaurants downtown. When we talk about vibrancy, this is not just for the restaurants only. We are an all-inclusive community, Councilor Bagley. That would mean retail, attorneys, lawyers, I mean, everybody downtown. Everybody needs that parking, and this is going to affect everybody again. So that's the other thing. The big thing here is I totally agree with City Manager Kennard on the price. The council previously asked the city manager to do research and go back and look at the data. She came back with $5,700. You took it down to $1,500. Again, she did the same research and came back with $3,000, and now you still want to cut it in half. So I would really ask you to take the city manager's advice on this and keep it higher. The next thing that was brought to all of our attentions is that some restaurants downtown can't afford this. It's not in their plan. So I guess I also agree with the city manager on this. When people bought their property downtown based on its location and all the amenities that it had. And what we're actually doing here is giving other restaurants an advantage to the people who had paid already for this by giving outdoor dining. And this came up last time we discussed this, and it's unfair for everybody else who had to pay for all these amenities. There's different locations in town that are definitely have an advantage just based on their location. The other thing that I would ask, and I would ask you to look at, because it really looks like that you're going towards a single establishment subsidy here. And it is spot zoning. There's only one establishment that has been constantly talked about here because of where they are, and you've made all kind of traffic adjustments for them. You're still talking about how to have them inclusive, and there's only one. So I would ask you to think about the rest of them and how you're looking at other establishments. of that kind. The last thing I guess I would like to bring to your attention is the restrictions that you're putting on for Mr. Fox. The restaurant, I would like you to think about this as discriminatory towards the restaurants who don't apply for outdoor dining. They can't receive that $500 if they don't. So is that discriminatory if they do not participate and can't receive that? They all have to participate, but half of them who have outdoor dining can come back and get another $500 off. I guess I would be a little upset if I was somebody who didn't want to participate and the guy next to me is getting the sidewalk and also the discount. So I'd like for you to think about that also. And last of all, this doesn't really have, from my perspective, this doesn't have anything to do with the revenue in the city. It has to do with the city coming out 2 years ago and happily supporting this during COVID and giving up our sidewalk space. And something I noticed that was not mentioned in the discussion here is this is also the residents' sidewalks and roads. We pay for them. And when you actually cut the revenue of the parking spaces, that becomes a subsidy on the side of all of the rest of the residents. And I would ask you to think about that too. I mean, there was a lot of money that came into restaurants and businesses all over town, and the residents did not receive anything. We pay taxes for these sidewalks, so I would ask you to consider that also. And the last thing would be, I really think that the public deserves a public hearing on this, as this will decrease our revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak? Mr. Dwyer, you just walked in. I was calling members of the public to speak.
Is it possible?
Yes, you literally just in time. Yeah, feel free to take a seat. Please state your name if you're a resident, and we're going to try to end in the next 5 to 10 minutes, so
Yeah,
you could
I
keep
can
it
be
under
quick.
3.
Yeah. My name's Kevin Dwyer. I live at 461 Middle Street in Portsmouth and own Dwyer's Pub at 96 Bridge Street in Portsmouth. And I just wanted to continue to advocate for the outdoor dining program. I hear everybody's side. I definitely am not looking for a handout. And I still, to this day, I've been going over last year's numbers. It actually accounts for a smaller portion of our sales to still our record high month in sales. We did completely without outdoor. But I grew up in Portsmouth. I'm a fan of the program. I'm a fan of Portsmouth. I think it's just, as somebody that's trying to invest my business in this community, I think it keeps us interesting, and I want to do it in a practical way and a cost-efficient way, but I just wanted to advocate for keeping Portsmouth interesting and doing so in a way that economically we can do our best in our patios and not spend more of the money on the fees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. Has anyone joined on Zoom?
They have not.
And there's currently the motion which I made to adopt these, then we amended it. Should we essentially vote on the amended policy?
Or we could have staff come back with a version for the city council based on the discussion.
How did you both leave it? It would come back under your name, or what's?
Yes. I was planning to submit it tomorrow, again, under my name with changes that were recommended from the fee study committee, assuming that there would be also a report back from the fee study committee. But I was planning to do that because there's a second part of the motion that has never been discussed at city council. It got referred before we even got to that, and that's also a really important part of the proposal.
So would City Manager, would it make sense if at the next city council meeting, it appears under both their names, the proposal with amendments, however, under our names, we could do a report back, but we'd likely just suspend the rules to let them go first. I'm not sure how we would we'd figure that part out.
Yep,
But,
that would make sense procedurally, yep.
All right.
Right.
Counselor Bagley.
Just a couple quick comments. I know we need to turn the room over. Hill Street came up, Mr. Dwyer's establishment. He does have 2 parking spaces in front that he could use. But I do think it's in the best interests of the city and the neighborhood where it was located previously, rather than in those parking spaces. So I think that's just looking out for, what makes the most sense. The second thing I would say is I did speak early on with the city manager, and the thought is after we pass this policy, we could then take the time to do 3 readings and make it an ordinance. So it would kind of be like we get a policy, implement it for this year, and then, in the middle of the summer or in the fall, we could do a 3-reading ordinance and have a public hearing with a little bit more data under our belts. I will say, last year we heard from about 200 residents by email, primarily residents, and it was overwhelmingly in favor. This year we've probably heard significantly less, maybe 20 or 30, and I would say it's mostly in favor, maybe not as much in favor as it was before. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything the city does that ever has 100% agreement.
Yeah, I can only count 4 people who are generally opposed to outdoor dining of the feedback that we've gotten in our
I would say it's a higher number than that, but
I think there's some who are concerned about the traffic lanes and some who are concerned about aesthetics, but, total opposition, only 4.
Well, thank you to the city staff. Thank you, Councilors Bagley and Cook. Thank you, members of the public. I'm looking forward to voting for this at the upcoming meeting. And I'm still going to push for my amendment for outdoor dining continuous current spaces.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to adjourn? Do we do that?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.